Hey guys, welcome to another podcast style video. This one is going to be about road cars and why new road cars are so bad. And of course, this also draws back to drift cars because drift cars are based on road cars. So there's a lot of overlap over there. A little background information. I've been working with cars since I was 14. And besides all the drift stuff that we do, so the drift parts that we sell, drift cars that we build and parts that we develop, I also have a second company which does the maintenance and repair of mainly BMW and Porsche. But our BMW and Porsche clients also have different cars, like family cars and stuff. So they end up in my workshop as well. So that's why I think I'm a little bit qualified to talk about this stuff. I've been working on BMW since they made their best products, which I think is the era basically mid-80s to mid and end of 90s. So you could basically say E30 all the way up to E46. The first reason would be that they are very, very complicated these days, and not just electronics and gadget-wise, but also the motor and the transmission are extremely complicated. This is all, in a way, partly forced by regulations. So cars need to meet all kinds of emissions regulations, which really are not realistic. Because they are devised by people that really don't know anything about cars. So what happens is there's some kind of committee in some country or some group of countries, like the European Union or something like that, or you could say like EPA in America or whatever, and they come up with all kinds of ideas which really are not viable because they're trying to solve some kind of problem that they either came up with by themselves or is bestowed upon them by politics. And they simply think that emissions of a car is like a knob you can turn on and you can always turn it like down, which is of course also fueled by something that a lot of people who are not engineers or mechanics do, and that is to think that the sky is the limit. That's like a really, really big problem, that people think that if you increase fuel economy in 10 years time, if you improve it by 10%, in 10 years time, they think that in 20 years time you can increase it 20% or 30%, 40%. They just draw that line. Anybody who does anything mechanical knows that that's absolutely not possible. But all these committees and all these people who fill their pockets of being in these committees, of course it's all a really big kickback circus as well. They simply come up with all kinds of rules. And they say, like, by 2025 this has to happen, by 2030 this has to happen. And I think that the viability of that stopped somewhere in the 2000s. So the cars were at peak performance in the 2000s, and everything that came after that is what I always call reshuffling the deck of cards. And you're putting the good cards on top, but you're not really changing the deck. So you're gonna put an 8-speed or a 9-speed transmission in a car, which at time of testing for emissions is going to put the car at like 1,000 RPM when you're driving 120 kilometers an hour, and you think that you've saved some fuel. And if you look at the standardized tests, the car is 20% more fuel efficient, but it really isn't. Because as soon as you have to do something, that car needs to shift back to the third or the fourth gear. It's a really good example of this is a BMW, the 335. When that the old model 335, the first 335, was 5-speed automatic, like a normal automatic, like there's been in BMWs for ages. And then the next model was an 8-speed. We work with energy labels in Europe, so it's like a car can have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, whatever. Energy label, A being the most economic. And that car went from a D label to a B label, but it's the exact same motor. It's exactly the same motor. It's not even a screw is different on that motor. So all of a sudden that became like two categories better just because of the transmission. But I have clients who have that car and who also had the old model, and they don't have any increase in fuel economy, like nothing. So in practice, it doesn't change anything. You would think like, well, if you put the car in cruise control, it's definitely going to be a lot more economic if it's like doing that low RPM. But in practice, that's like 2 or 3%, and it's offset by all kinds of other things. The transmission is way heavier, it's way more resistance. And the big problem, of course, is that it's extremely complicated transmission, and they fail all the time. A company like ZF makes these transmissions, which is a German company. It makes transmissions for a very, very long time, so those guys know what they're doing. But because these transmissions are so bizarrely complex, they will just fail. Even on small motors, we had an Audi Q5 with a 2-liter TFSI motor, which is 140 horsepower. The car had very low mileage, like 40,000 miles or something, like 65,000 kilometers. And it just wouldn't engage reverse gear anymore. We ended up replacing the transmission, which is 11,000 euros. It takes 800 euros worth of oil. The bolts that attach it to the transmission are special bolts. You only use them once, 250 euros. So that's like already like 13,000 euros in parts, and then it still needs to be put in the car, and it needs to be registered with the computer and all that kind of shit. So that's a huge repair, rendering that car economically total loss. So that's one of the big reasons why cars are really bad, because they're made to be really complicated. Of course, also the engines. Like if you look at an engine bay of cars post like 2005, like cars that came basically after 2005, were developed after 2005. A lot of them are direct injected. Which seems to be a really good idea, because the reason why manufacturers want to do that is because there's more control over the mixture, there's more control over the fuel injection, because you can put different amounts of mixture into the combustion chamber at different times in the cycle, which is in a way not bad. And the biggest reason why they want to use it is because they can combat detonation with it. So if you have a turbo motor like a 335 or the Mercedes, the supercharged motors and all that stuff, they can run reasonably high compression and still have a turbo, because the direct injection can deal with that. The only problem is that it's, again, super complicated, and the injectors are really expensive and they fail all the time. I had a BMW 7 Series at low mileage. It was babied. My own car, it never sleeps outside, only sees highway use, like gets new oil in it every 5,000 miles, like put the best grade of fuel in it. And what happens is that it simply needed 8 new injectors when it was like a couple years old. So I put new injectors in the car, sold it, bought this E38 and never looked back. So it's just a little too complicated. It's one of those things that people come up with in laboratories and like development engineers, but it's really not something that's going to stand the test of time. It's going to be really expensive, and there's a lot of people watching this video going to say like, yeah, but it became a lot cheaper. Yeah, so they were like 600 euros first, those injectors, and now they're like 320. So I think an injector should cost 50 or 60 bucks. So it really doesn't make much sense if you have a car like a 6-cylinder or 8-cylinder and you have to put 2,000 euros worth of injectors in them, and you need to register them in the system again. So out comes the laptop. Also, a really good example of way too complicated stuff is headlights. If you look at the BMW F Series, like an F10 or 7 Series F01, the headlights are like 1,000 euros, and we buy them all the time because they fail all the time. And it's a sealed unit. On some years, like the ambient light, I don't know how you call it in English, but like the halo rings, like not your actual light, but like the light that's on, like that doesn't really do anything. It just marks the shape of the headlights. It's basically like almost like a vanity light. On some years you cannot replace them. So if those halo rings, I think the yellow ones you can replace, but the blue ones you can't replace. If they fail, over here it fails the technical inspection. All European countries have technical inspection. All the lights and everything has to work for that. If that part of the light doesn't work, you have to replace the whole headlight. That headlight is 1,000 bucks without anything in it. So it also has a unit for the indicator, which is a LED unit, which looks a little bit like a hedgehog. So it's an aluminum piece with like fins on it. That's already like 250 euros. So if your indicator fails, that's 250 euros. And the headlight itself, which doesn't come with the indicator, is $1,000. It also doesn't come with any of the bulbs. So let's say that your headlights get stolen out, it's like €2,000 to get them a piece. And there's like a chip in them, which is another like €300, which is like a little card that's stuck in the back, which has flash code on it. So that's like written by the ECU. And those things corrode because those headlights are, of course, made by the lowest bidder, which is another part of this story that I'm gonna touch upon soon. So what happens is that those headlights, they leak, and they corrode like that little plate, that little chip in it, and you don't even know that. So the client brings the car up and says like, hey, there's some moisture in my headlights, and gives like some fault code on the dashboard. Can you fix it? And checking it out, I'm like, yeah, but there's moisture in the headlight, which we really can't do anything about. There's water in the headlight. Only way to solve that is to replace the headlight, because we've had it a billion times. You can go around with sealant and make a huge mess, but it really doesn't work. It's just the inherent design. And usually that little chip card is also corroded, which is causing all the errors. So there you are, buying a whole headlight and all this stuff. And then when it's in the car, you need to put the laptop on and make the computer in the car recognize the headlight. So it's just one of those things, like on a car like this, on an E38, it takes me 2 minutes. It's a V8 7 Series. So it's a big motor in a 7 Series, and it takes me like 2 minutes to swap out any light bulb. On the E46s, if you have like the xenon stuff, then it's like around $80 or $60 for the xenon bulbs. So that's like overseeable. So that's really, really bad. What I touched upon before, another reason why cars are really, really bad is that most of cars, like increasingly big amount of parts in cars, are not made by the manufacturer anymore. So this is not something new. So there's a lot of suppliers in automotive, and there have been there has been suppliers like, of course, since cars have been made. So you can think about a Goodrich or BBS or all these companies that make components. But these car manufacturers, they want to make less and less components themselves. So the amount of stuff on a car that's made by a third party is increasing with every model that they come up with, simply because they can control it much better. And these companies, you need to understand a little bit how these companies are relating to each other, and I'll give you a good example of that. So let's say a company like Volkswagen, because the VAG group is really notorious for it, they really try to lean on their suppliers. It's really not nice. Like, I have a couple of friends that work at third-party suppliers. And what happens if VW makes a new car? Let's say they make a new VW Golf, which is one of the best-selling cars in Europe for decades. They say like, hey, we're going to need wiper motors, and we're going to need seat belts, and we're going to need steering wheels and all the stuff. None of that stuff they make themselves. So they write out a tender for 250 million wiper motors, and there's going to be a couple big companies, of course, they're huge companies like 3,000-4,000 employees, that are going to bid on those tenders. It's like, hey, we can make them, we can make this wiper motor or this seat belt for 20 euros, or it's probably going to be 5 euros. And the problem with these contracts between these manufacturers and the third-party suppliers is that the manufacturer holds all the rights. So if they make a seatbelt for a VW, all the research and development, even all the information about tooling and all that stuff, that's intellectual property of the car manufacturer, not of the supplier. Keep that in mind. So what happens is that these car companies are going to lean on the supplier later in the life cycle of the car. So they're going to say like, hey, the economy isn't doing too well, because there's always something. It's like either a banking crisis or COVID or whatever the hell, currency conversion or a war somewhere. And they're going to say like, oh guys, we're so sorry, we're not doing too well with this car. Yeah, electrification, blah blah blah, really big problem. We're not using it that much, and we need to crunch our prices, all kinds of ridiculous reasons. And they're gonna say like, yeah, you guys can still keep making that wiper motor for us, but instead of 5 euros, we're gonna pay you guys 4 euros and 27 cents. And this supplier that has a contract for 5 or 6 or 8 years already bid in a way that they're not making money in the first couple of years because there's so many people who want this contract. And they've got mouths to feed. They've got thousands of employees. So what's going to happen is that they're going to say like, oh damn, like they can't say no. But let's say that they bid for €5, and that €5 is going to make them money in the 5th year of the 7-year contract. If VW forces them to go to €4.27, they can't do it. They're losing on it. But most of these companies will actually take that loss. And why? Because they're like, yeah, and then we got like scored some points with VW, and we'll be in a better position for the next bid in 2 years for this and that model, which is really going to be revolutionized. They're really going to sell 500 million of them, because that's how it's sold, because they're car salesmen. I mean, simple as that. Doesn't matter what level they are. Actually, the manufacturer level are way bigger weasels than a used car dealer lot on the corner of the street. So that's like how they sell it. Like, yeah, if you guys work with us on this price, we can work with you guys on the next bid. All lies, all 100% lies. Like, it's simple as that. So this manufacturer is going to make this wiper motor for €4.27. But what are they going to do? They're going to call their copper supplier. They're going to call their metal supplier. They're going to skimp on quality control, and they're going to bring their costs down as well. And their quality control is going down. So if they throw 1 out of 1,000 wiper motors out at €5, they're going to say, oh, well, €4.27, we'll only throw 1 out of 10,000 wiper motors out. So you're going to get a worse wiper motor in your car. It's simple as that. Because the manufacturer, like VW, leans on this supplier. There's nothing they can do. If they lose that contract, they have to fire 2,000 people. And they have contracts with their suppliers for raw materials. So they can't do anything else. Another really big problem, of course, is that they don't hold the intellectual property. So if VW says, yeah, thanks a lot, guys, we're not going to work with you guys if you don't want to get to €4.27, everything, every research, little bit of research, everything goes to VW. They already have it. So they phone up the next person in the tender, and they said like, hey, can you guys make that part for €4? And we've got all the data of the previous supplier for you. This is not some kind of wild story. This happens every day for decades in automotive, for decades. Like, for instance, an indicator switch. Like, I just turned on the wipers. So stalk switch is what they're called. Those are extremely elaborate parts. They're very, very expensive to make, and they're very difficult to make. And why is that? Because the same car that's going to go to Canada is also going to go to Saudi Arabia. Which means that stalk switch needs to operate when it's minus 30 degrees Celsius, but also when it's plus 40 or 50 degrees Celsius for 10 or 15 or 20 years. So the grease that goes into that thing, and it also obviously it can squeak or make weird noises or feel weird or start feeling differently because people are going to complain. Like, the list of requirements is insane for those things. It really is a huge list. You don't want to know how big. So if you make like a wiper motor or a stalk switch for VW, they give you a file which is 100 times bigger than this. It's like, doesn't even fit in the back of a trunk, with the requirements. One of the requirements for a wiper motor is, for instance, like it's got to be waterproof. That's one requirement. But they'll have 1,500 pages of requirements, what that part needs to do. And you need to meet all of them. Simple as that. And the problem is, of course, the stalk switch, just to find out what grease has to go into it, and what tolerance, and what kind of plastic, and what kind of copper, and all that thing, that takes ages to find out, ages. And VW and all the other manufacturers, they own everything. So companies that make these stalk switches will lose everything they have, even if it's like the stuff that they've worked for 20 or 30 years on, like stuff like, oh, we still know that from the 83 model, this and that, where we made this and that stalk switch. Let's see if we can use this grease. If they lose that contract, they lose all that information. It goes to probably their biggest competitor. So they're going to start making a shitty stalk switch because they're price pushed. And that's why all of a sudden on the newer cars, all these things are starting to fail. Things that I've never seen fail on an E30 or on an E36 or an E39 are all of a sudden failing on BMWs. It's the same thing with the motors. Open the hood, pull the plastic cover off, everything under there. The cam cover is plastic. Everything is plastic. It's just junk. Of course, on the E36, they had plastic impellers on the water pump, but it became a huge problem. There's aftermarket companies selling metal impeller water pumps for that reason. So it's just all a money game. It's all about money, and the manufacturers, they really don't care about anything else than the warranty period. So as soon as that warranty period is over, they don't care about what happens to the car. They don't care about the third owner, the fourth owner. They don't care. Lots of these companies are even trying to get rid of all the people that are rightfully claiming warranty. So if the car is like, I had a BMW 7 Series with an N engine in it. It was an E65, and it was a 750 Li, and the car had super low mileage. This is actually a really nice story how it ended up, but I don't care. I'm not ashamed of it. So I had that car. I really loved it, but it used a quart of oil every 500 miles, every 800 kilometers. It used a quart of oil, which is insane. And this car was still under warranty. So I hit up BMW, say, hey guys, I have this car and it's using a quart of oil every 500 miles. What are we going to do about it? And it's smoking and stuff, because it's the valve seals, like that happens to the motor. N63 motor is very well known for it. It's a really big problem for it. But that car was like almost brand new back then. What happened is that they actually said, well, we need to keep statistics of that, and we need to start filling out like a little statistic about it. I said, well, I already did it. Like, I drove 3,000 miles with a car, and it's using a quart of oil every 500 miles. There's no need to keep statistics. Like, this is the statistics. Like, yeah, we need to, and there's like this whole thing where they're procrastinating the whole damn thing. Like, yeah, no, we don't know, like some oil usage, it's normal. I'm like, this car is like 20,000 miles and it's using this amount of oil. It's not acceptable at all. And it's smoking from the back of the car. Of course, they don't know that I'm a mechanic. They don't know I have a repair shop. I'm just never played that card until I need it. And at one point they were saying, it's a specific feature of that product. It's a specific product feature. I'm like, what? The specific product feature is that I have a fucking James Bond smoke screen behind me every time I'm idling in front of a traffic light, and that the damn thing uses a quart of oil every 500 miles. That's a specific product feature. So, and this was during warranty. They stretched it out and stretched it out and stretched it out, and they were like, no, try this oil, try that oil. I was like, yeah, I'm going to sell that car, and we'll sue those assholes. I put that car up for sale. Who buys it? A different BMW dealer from a different part of the country buys that car, because it was kind of a rare car that had separate seats and stuff. So we put that car up for sale. They buy it. They buy that car. What happens a couple months later? They hit us up and they say, that car we bought off of you is consuming oil, and we want to come to a solution for you about that. I'm like, well, that's really convenient, because I've got an email here from this and that BMW dealer. It says it's a specific product feature, so maybe you guys can phone each other and talk about it, And that's the one time that stuff, it didn't really end well, because we ended up taking a loss on that car. But still, that's how they work. And they make a shit product, and they know that if they make 100,000 shitty cars, and there's going to be a huge failure with 100 of them or 1,000 of them, that only half of those people are going to take them to court and get like a settlement or whatever. They really don't care about that too much. It's just a numbers game. So like, yeah, we're saving 27 million by making a shitty motor. And we're probably going to end up paying 2 million in damages. So they make 25 million, and that's how they work. That's how these big manufacturers work. It's not a wild story. All this stuff is first-hand experience. I've even been in those meetings. I've assisted in court cases as an external expert, advising lawyers and judges about these things. So I know exactly what's going on. Sounds very arrogant, but this has been a big part of my life for many, many years. So that's really what's going on. That's why cars are really bad, because manufacturers also now, they know exactly how bad they have to make it, because there's so much control of everything. They know exactly. They'll just have a stress test, and they'll say like, hey, let's run this wiper motor this and that long, and if it's gone through this and that many cycles, that's totally fine. And then it's allowed to fail. Whereas in the 80s and 90s, they just wanted to build the best wiper motor and build the best transmission. And there was a lot more money to go around. So the manufacturers and the third-party suppliers, they all made their money. Companies like BBS, Bosch, they're all giant companies because of that. Because they made really good stuff, like Robert Bosch, which is an engineering firm that was founded in the 19th century. He was known to pay really good wages to his people. And one of his mottos was, our stuff is really good because I pay my people good wages, you know, because they are the company and they want to go the extra mile to get good stuff. And that's all out of the window because it's all a really big hustle to get those third-party suppliers to make the parts as cheap as possible. But even if they do that, they still get pinched. So I hope you guys, this is a little bit off the normal topic. I hope you guys still enjoy it. I hope the audio is good. If you guys want to hear more of these a little bit more universal automotive stories and more universal automotive topics, let me know. I've got a ton more of them, and I'm just recording this when I'm driving to my destination. So if there's any questions, maybe some things are a little bit hard to understand. For me, it makes a lot of sense, but this is not scripted, or it's not like I have like some kind of like piece of paper here where I'm looking at. You can see me looking at the camera all the time. It's just completely unscripted. So if things because of that are a little bit unclear, don't hesitate to ask. Thank you guys so much for your time, and see you on the next one.
Don't forget to take a look at our website as well, einzel.nl. We ship worldwide, of course, Wisefab, Feel Suspension, our own brand Einzel, gearboxes, quick change differentials, axles, all kinds of things. A lot of fabrication components, of course, air jacks, subframes for quick change, you name it. Drop us an email and we'll hook you up.